Welcome to EpiSTEM podcast. This EpiSTEM podcast is brought to you from the National Centre of STEM Education at the School of Education in the University of Limerick. I'm your host, Geraldine Simmie, and I'm the Professor of STEM Education here at the Centre and the Director of EpiSTEM. And my co-host,
Michelle Starr, and I am the Research Liaison Officer in EpiSTEM.
Welcome back, everyone, to the EpiSTEM podcast and to our guest, a special guest today, Associate Professor Jason Power. Jason, you're very welcome. And Jason's a senior lecturer with us in the School of Education and Engineering Education. Very, very welcome today.
Welcome, Jason.
Yeah. And Michelle is here with us as well.
Yeah.
Thanks very much.
Yeah.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, lovely. Tell us something about yourself before we start into, I suppose, your research and your interest in engineering education and where it came from.
Well, I suppose initially, actually, my interest was primarily in engineering. When I was young, I grew up on a farm, but when you grow up on a farm, you're always fixing or breaking something. So you're taking it apart, figuring out what's wrong, trying to put it back together. And that kind of defined my childhood. I always enjoyed that kind of puzzle, and I got great satisfaction in fixing something that wasn't working or creating something that solved the problem. So then in second level, obviously I was drawn to the subject of engineering, and then I thought, oh, this would be cool. Like teaching someone about engineering seems interesting. So when I was considering third level options, then I saw a program for engineering teaching. I thought that's interesting. And then when I was going through the degree program, we had various modules that looked at psychology of education, and kind of, I suppose, my initial interest in how machines work and how devices work and taking them apart and figuring them out. And I was like, oh, so psychology is essentially looking at people, figuring out how they work, why they behave in certain ways, what factors in create what outputs out or behaviours out. So that really sparked an interest in me again.
You were drawn into kind of the relationship between the subject of engineering and I suppose the science of psychology, the science of behaviour. Yeah.
And that, because I've often, you speak with colleagues at conferences and stuff, and I tell them that I do my PhD is essentially experimental psychology, but my undergraduate is the engineering. And they're going, that is a strange mix. And it's fundamentally about figuring out how stuff works. But I suppose you could say that about most things. But it's been very challenging, very interesting. I like multidisciplinary stuff. I find that you go into a new field or a new area, and yes, it's initially very, very difficult, but you learn a huge amount in that first 6 months, that first 12 months. After a while, you can build your expertise, but I find it's that first 12 months of challenge and uncertainty and learning. I find that really interesting. Yeah,
you came over and did some very nice different conferences and seminars with us in EpiSTEM on science engineering and on just professional practice and academic practice of teaching and teaching in third level. And you brought in such a mixture of people, and it's such a great way of that, just opening questions. I think that's what I love really, I suppose, is that you can open the question and stay with the fact that you're not having to close it down to an easy answer.
Yeah, and I remember that day because a lot of the hardcore engineers and lecturers came over, and they mixed with social science researchers from EpiSTEM and teacher educators from EpiSTEM. But like such a brilliant space, like you've got people from such diverse backgrounds. We're all after the same goal, which is to enhance student learning, to do better in our jobs. But I love that many different people in the room with that many different ideas of how the world works, how we should solve problems, how we should seek answers. That to me is one of the most interesting parts of the job. You can sit down with these people who have a completely different background, and that again, I think that's where you learn quickly and you learn the best. We recently published that paper, you and I did, but like there are things that from a chat with you for half an hour, I'd say this with respect and admiration, you've a completely different background to me, very different worldview. But I think when we talk about a problem or a challenge, those unique perspectives allow both of us to figure it out a bit quicker and a bit better.
They do. The multiple disciplines. Yeah. I mean, I was at a conference with the Department of Education yesterday, and they were looking at futures thinking, and it was a little bit beyond, I think, a lot of people that were there to think about this in real terms, but people were saying that the future is with the multidisciplinary and transdisciplinary. Now, we haven't got our head around how that can happen, but that is, futuristic problems are going to be bigger than any one discipline on its own is going to manage.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I love because that's the way we work in EpiSTEM. and especially working with Geraldine, is that having that multidisciplinary approach. And I love bringing in, as you know, what you're saying is the social sciences with the pure science and with the education and all of that, because they're so important. They're coming from, you know, everyone has their objective. And I know with the social sciences, it's all about understanding how things work, how society works, how, you know, and that isn't so important. And it's a question for every type of education is what is the culture, I suppose, where I would be coming from in a lot of this. But can I just bring you back? So you're now into teacher or engineering education. When you were going to secondary school, did you have the opportunity of the subject engineering in, because it's a fairly new subject within the curriculum, but were you within, you had that opportunity?
So the subject isn't actually that new.
Okay.
So like it would have, way back in the day, it would have been called metalwork, but senior cycle was typically called engineering. And that the subject as it currently stands really has its origins in the late 50s and is in desperate need of an update.
So it was what I remember, of course, it was only in the boys' schools, but it was the metalwork or the technical graphics or technical drawing, etc.
And there's a really interesting history to those, because if you look at where the technology subjects were offered, it was offered in the Colostas. And you might remember, perhaps you might have relatives who went to the tech. So there was the tech.
But the tech was my era.
Yeah.
Because I remember, I went to a secondary school, but I know that, there was a tech, we used to call it, was another school, which was on the other side, in town as well.
But I talk to my students about this, if you need to understand the basic history of that, because the the technical college was designed to essentially be a parallel education system.
It was.
So you had your CBS, your Christian Brothers, and that was where the sons and daughters of the accountants and the doctors and the business owners went. And then you had the tech. Now the tech was the place where the sons of farmers and mechanics and blacksmiths went.
Yeah, exactly.
Imagine creating an entirely separate school system. And we talk about stuff like sociology and how society reflects education, education reflects society. That separation of subjects to this day still exists. Now, there's been some blurring of the lines, but the vast majority of your traditional second level schools, your church-run schools, CBSs, those type of things, they don't offer engineering. Most of them don't offer the full suite of technology subjects. Many of them may offer one or two. Usually they'll go with the technical drawing side of it, or graphics, as it's now referred to. But that I find fascinating.
I must say I do. I did my PhD back in, I got it in 2009, but I did it with Seamus O'Buchala. Now Seamus has died since, but he wrote a great book on education policy in Ireland, and he would write, he'd have all the letters from the bishops and all that in the past in there. And in 1932 or sometime when the Technical Education Act was brought in, the bishops at the time, who were very powerful, of course, stopped offering. They only allowed that in so long as the students in the school didn't do a leaving cert.
That's right.
And it lasted. I was fascinated, but he had the Archbishop of Limerick, I think, is the letter that he has in his book. But I think it went from 1932 to 1964, and I was surprised that it was Paddy Hillary that was Minister for Education that just changed it overnight. I was fascinated by that.
That change was probably because of the famous IIE report. But it was a class structure. I mean, it was a way of maintaining that social class. That
and it
class
separated mind
structure.
from hand, from head,
Absolutely.
from heart. And there's still a problem with that holistic view of human beings, the head, the heart, the hand, that there's still an issue around that in the world, but it was so strong that time. That was used as a division of labour, wasn't it?
It was, and it's funny you mentioned that, but you look at where that mandate came from. The church wanted to keep these class systems in place because that favoured the church massively. Because the wealthy and the powerful and the leaders of the community would go to the Christian Brothers or wherever, and we wanted to keep them separate from the people who would essentially be the labour force as opposed to the management
Well, I think
force.
it suited the state as well. So, I mean, it suited a whole lot of all, we'd say, leadership and policy makers and, with precarious work and everything today. We better not get started because
we'll never stop.
we'll never get back to, as I said, tell me what you regard as your research expertise, I mean, in the engineering education. And I know you're a fantastic researcher. You have a huge amount published. But what would you say is your unique excellence in research?
Well, I tend to focus on a particular theory, self-efficacy. Now, you can broadly class that as non-cognitive factor, but to explain that, it would say that self-efficacy theory is basically your belief in your competence and your ability to succeed in a particular area. So the example I tend to give is that if we're trying to get someone to run a 5K and that requires them to commit to a couple of months of training and stuff like that, their belief system at the start of that process will govern a huge amount of what happens in the coming months. Somebody who believes that they, through training and through effort, they can get to that point and they can work hard and they can improve because they believe they can reach that outcome, they're more likely to stick with their training regime, to show up to training, to eat right, to stick to discipline, and they will be more likely, I'm not saying it's only that, but they're more likely to hit their goal of 5K or 2K, whatever it is.
Yes.
Conversely, if someone doesn't believe they have a reasonable chance of success, they are far less likely to engage and to, in the face of adversity, if they fail the first time, they're way less likely to keep going. They're way less likely to show up to train, all these different things.
And of course, the adversity, it's like when they fail and fall, that's where it really kicks in, isn't it? This belief, because it's in those, it's when it really hits the ground that way that this can go wrong, isn't it?
It is. And that then, I think for any educator or for any parent or for any coach, you should be able to see the value of that straight away in education.
Yes.
We need to fail. We need to struggle.
And we need to learn how to fail better the next time, kind of thing.
Exactly. But and even the way we've studied self-efficacy from numerous different ways, but you'll find that people with high self-efficacy, when they fail, they don't consider it a catastrophic setback. It's just, I need to do something different to get past this.
Yes.
So there's loads of different theories that tie into it. How people
is one of them Bandura's theory? And
so Bandura would have written self-efficacy theory. It's part of his broader social cognitive learning theory. So Bandura would have came up with that. Would have been
one of the theorists in it.
But 80s, it became quite popular in the 80s. It's now, I would say, quite certainly, it's one of the most popular self-regulation theories now.
Yes.
So it belongs to a broader branch of theory. And self-regulation, again, for teaching and learning is so important, because if you can't make yourself get up and go, if you can't recover from a setback and so it goes back to what we said at the start about figuring out how things work, how people work.
Well, it's connected then to motivation and to all those psychology features and attributes like confidence, motivation, all of that. Yeah. And so it's kind of that deep study. So you're doing that kind of study with a particular lens of engineering education, being your research expertise, and then your publications follow along in that space.
And how do you think do you find you transfer that then to the classroom, when you're going into your classroom then?
So, this is one of my pet peeves about education research. People often talk about the theory-practice divide. I'm a big believer in research that impacts the classroom. So how the teacher behaves, how the students experience it. I think that's critical. I think there's been too big a gap in the past. But to go back to that particular
point, you're right, because there's a relationship. The teacher has to relate to the students and vice versa. Yeah. It's not one way.
No, and it's a complex dynamic. But so specifically, our latest paper that Geraldine and I published, it only came out today, but it looked at how people form self-efficacy. So when you say you form your belief system, what informational sources do you draw from? So we examined a first-year cohort and a fourth-year cohort in the engineering program.
Okay.
And we found that they draw from very different experiences to form their self-efficacy beliefs. So in first year, they massively valued applied settings. So something that kind of mimics industry setting. So we would set them problem-based challenges where they'd have to work as a team, build a prototype, meet certain briefs and design specifications, these type of things. That made them more confident in their ability to succeed. It's a challenge.
They saw something being put. They did it.
They did it, but there's a lot of different sources in the feed into that. So let's say the three of us were working on a team project. I could keep getting set back in the calculations, but Michelle, you might be flying at it, and you go, no, we can do this. Look, you just want to do this, and that unit converts to this.
Yes.
I then can learn from you, but also I can build my belief system, because if you can do it, and I'm kind of similar to you, well, maybe I can do it too.
Okay.
And then when we succeed as a team in a small challenge, which is called a mastery source, that has a profound effect, because yes, this is a small project, and no, it's not the same as being a fully fledged engineer, but we were given a problem, we worked together, it was damn hard, but we got there, and look what we did. So those type of mastery experiences are extremely important. So there's a good example of how you develop pedagogy in the classroom. Like what we tend to use is problem-based learning, project-based learning. But within that, there's a huge amount of different teaching strategies. There's cooperative learning, we form teams, there's self and peer assessment, which is very important for that vicarious source where you will tell me how I'm doing, I will tell you how we're doing, not just in a kind of a happy, friendly way, but
yes.
Michelle, you did a great job there, but if you did it this
it's a
way...
critique, good critique.
Yeah, you have a good number of PhD students, and you have, I suppose, brought in expertise from, have you European and international projects that you've done? Yep. Give us an idea of where you have that kind of oeuvre and collection of research that you have amassed at this point.
Yeah, so I suppose my PhD students, I won't name them, but if they are listening to this, they are one of the highlights of the job. Like you work with such clever, driven, dynamic people. And there are days when you're tired and you just don't want to do something, and then you have a chat with somebody who's made such a massive leap in the last week in their understanding, and they're going to contribute so much to the world when they graduate and they go on. That for me is so energizing. It's like a double espresso shot. These people are incredible, and they work so hard, and they do great things, and it's why I love systems like the EPI STEM Centre, where you can bring people like that together. Because I think the real danger for PhD students is isolation.
Yeah.
But yeah, so half of my PhD students tend to focus on that kind of self-efficacy research, engineering education research. We look at various different factors, not just that theory. The other half of my PhD students are more industry-based. So one of them is looking at digitization of university systems and record systems, like incredible work. The other student is working on basically learning standards and specific learning needs within the biomedical research
kind of area. Yeah.
So, but they're all, fundamentally, they're all seeking to solve an issue, and in solving that issue to have a positive impact in the world.
Yes.
That's the kind of common trait I've seen between all PhD
well,
students.
I mean, that's what I enjoy about working with you, Jason, because I know engineering is very problem solving. And my kind of chemistry science hat on me, and particularly with the education bit of awareness I've now, I'm kind of going problem posing and keep it open. And I know your natural instinct is problem solving. And I kind of think the two tectonic plates, when they meet, give us probably that bigger space. And I suppose, Michelle, you look at these problems more like as cultural problems as well.
Yeah.
And that kind of even opens it out further
yeah,
again.
Just see, throw that into the mix. And you kind of can understand how people react when, everyone has a culture, and they have their life, and, whatever has built their perceptions, etc., and they're bringing that in. So,
And traditionally, engineering is very male-dominated space. It's very much, it's trying to introduce all the STEM subjects, more interest to girls and minorities and all that. And it is itself as a culture. It probably, if you look at it as a culture, it's hard enough as a culture to shake. I guess the self-efficacy piece is about what can be done individually, but sure, the culture of the whole thing needs shaking as well. Yeah,
and actually, a lot of our research, we do focus a lot on like the different gendered experiences, and like self-efficacy research internationally would show a significant difference in engineering spaces, in STEM spaces, in terms of male and female experiences, how they draw from. Even their experience of different pedagogies is actually pretty stark. So if you go for a more traditional engineering education environment of individualistic, highly competitive, that is widely shown to disadvantage minorities and women in those spaces, because that's not the type of environment that they thrive in.
Yeah.
But if you look at stuff like problem-based learning, which is fundamentally cooperative, so a group of people working together to solve a problem, that tends to be better, much, much better for women and for minority students. But it's also better for male students, for men as well. Because fundamentally what employers are looking for now, and you said earlier, is that multidisciplinarity. They don't want an expert who can solve a quadratic equation on the back of a napkin in 30 seconds.
Yeah.
What they want are people who can work with other people. Yeah. You need to be able to collaborate, because you said it earlier, today's problems are really complex. There is no lone wolf solution anymore. Like back in the day, you could have one genius engineer or one genius physicist.
Yes, they were off in the corner and they didn't have to talk to anyone. In fact, back to the wall,
Yeah, but you look at the problems
They're
now.
still there.
Yeah.
Well, there are a few, there are.
But if you look at the problems now, like you take, let's say CERN, where we're looking at the very particles of the universe.
Yeah.
But there are tens of thousands of people that work directly on that one experiment. But there are hundreds of thousands of scientists around the world who are experimenting with those people through shared data sets and everything. So today's problems, they're much bigger. They demand collaboration. And even collaboration at a global level. We're not going to solve climate change because Ireland dropped its CO2 output by 10%. We need to completely change energy generation across the globe.
That's why we're kind of excited, I suppose, ourselves about trying to get the idea that it's going to be as much our values and our interest as much as it'll be our knowledge. It'll be a whole mix of things that'll solve all of those things in due course. Yep. Thank you so much for coming today. Yeah. It's been a fabulous chatting with you, and every good wish with your research, and you have a huge output. It's fantastic listening to you, and of course that education hat that you wear, as well as the engineering and the STEM and STEAM education pieces, they all benefit from that kind of looking at it in that broader multidisciplinary, transdisciplinary way as well. Do you want to add anything there, Michelle?
Yeah, well, I'm going to ask something, because now talking and listening to you, and I'm going to ask you a very, very basic question before we finish off, is maybe just to explain to us what engineering is, because, there's so many branches, and you're here talking about things that are so interesting, like you brought in the science of psychology and the self-efficacy, and then solving, the different areas of your PhD studies are in. And I'm going, the public perception of engineering is like building a bridge. So if you can just explain to our listeners.
So I think a good way of kind of positioning it is comparing it to science. So scientists typically want to answer a question. Yeah. It could be particle physics, or it could be biology, it could be chemistry. They're more concerned about the knowledge generation of why does this happen.
Yeah.
Engineers are more concerned about the how and how to solve that. So an engineer doesn't really care about, let's say, the full theoretical underpinnings, like the atomic level of materials. What they care about is, you've given me a problem. I have a certain amount of resources to solve this problem. I have a certain amount of performance indicators that I must meet when I'm solving that problem.
Yeah.
And once I solve that problem and we're happy with the performance of the solution, that's kind of the level of understanding typically that engineers are happy with.
Okay. So it doesn't have to be a construction, it's any sort of a problem. So it fits in with that. That's what I love about this.
Yes.
It could be.
I love listening to that. Yeah, very interesting. And also the fact that there's a pragmatism in engineering as well, because obviously for something to really work, like your bridge and all the different things, you actually at some point somebody will have to knock a piece to something, will have to get knocked together with a bang. I remember watching a fantastic program one night of building a new train, and it was all done, and they were lowering the carriage down onto the wheels, and everything was so precise and everything, and the next thing they had to just take up a big mallet and bang it together at the very, very last minute. So there's all that in it. And how badly they could make another podcast. We so badly need really good engineering in Ireland for, my dream ticket is always, I'm always waxing on about our electric train system and our bringing our, transport system together and doing a really modern job, and never mind health and all the other areas. Sure, engineering goes across all areas of life.
Yeah, and I think people sometimes forget that everything you encounter is basically a very complex system. Like, when you look at the national grid, for example, if you consider that to be one machine, it's the biggest thing in the country, the biggest machine in the country. We can send potential energy, or we can send electrical energy from Dublin to the west coast, out to the furthest reach of a cottage in the blink of an eye. And we kind of look at those things because we experience them. It's like going, we take them for granted. But people criticise the ESB for that massive drop and the downtime. You have to remember, we were hit by the biggest storm we had in 100 years.
Yes.
And we take it for granted because that system is so incredibly reliable. The only reason it is as reliable as it is because there is extremely talented technicians and engineers up and down the country balancing that grid every day, maintaining connections, planning for future shortages, planning for future surpluses. It is insanely complicated. And the only reason we were so shocked by the lack of electricity is because they've been so good at it.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. And the other piece, I suppose, the lovely piece coming from that is, I suppose, when in trouble, our European partners showed up as well and helped us. Now, we better put a finish to this. Okay. Thank you so much. This is our Associate Professor, Jason Power, and we'll finish off with today. And
Thanks, Jason.
Thank you so much.
Thanks very much for having me.
Our music today, barn dance, the Kilnamona barn dance. It's a County Clare barn dance. It's very appropriate and played by Avril McLaughlin. Thank you for today.